Hey, just wanted to take a moment and welcome everybody to another episode of Rebuilding Life After Addiction here with Rob, Grant, and Daniel. And we are excited about another conversation. And man, it is like negative 10-degree wind chill right now in Virginia. And Rob is
Wow.
grinning because he's in California. Like, you got a hoodie on, but I don't even think you need to be wearing it.
Nope.
Like, it's
No,
almost
this
like
is just comfy.
it's like passive aggressively bragging to me that it's warm out there.
Hold on. Let me do y'all a favor and just make y'all, just step into my world for a moment. The
I
weather
feel like I'm
here
going to be
currently.
annoyed when I see this.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, see, it's 58 degrees, guys. It's
Yeah.
not that bad. Yeah. Hey.
It's -5 and ice, man, all over the road. But I'm excited about another conversation, man. Rob, how you doing, bro?
Dude, it's been a very long week. Just came off of a nasty sickness. It's been going around everywhere, but other than that, man, I'm well, dude. I mean, my life couldn't be any better, right? I'm alive, and that's what I'm grateful for. Grateful to be on another podcast. And this is a old friend, man, that I went through Teen Challenge with, which is pretty interesting because like our stories, we were two separate people, but what intrigued me to like even invite him on the show was one of his recent posts that I saw maybe couple months back. But it was just to see the transformation because I knew him at Teen Challenge, and
Mhm.
I could vouch and say that the very thing that he posted was so genuine and raw and authentic. And I was just like, man, I gotta have that on the show because people struggle. And I think something that's really interesting to me is that when people struggle in life, they tend to hide it, right? And they're like, man, like how do I do this? Or I've relapsed, man. Like what are people gonna think of me, man? But Daniel, nope. Like he'd be proud to say, man, I messed up. And guess what? I found that being sober is actually a lot better than what I thought it was going to be,
Mhm.
And so it's just cool to see the transformation in you, dude, and what you're doing. And so I'm excited for you to be able to kind of share your story and just really let people understand the importance of what it is to be plugged in with certain groups and communities and
Mhm.
how you essentially have bounced back from some shame that relapse can often cause,
Right.
and how rewarding it is now to be able to be on the other side and giving other people hope.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. I'm
Yeah.
happy to
Yeah.
be here. So,
Nice to meet you, Daniel. What part of the country are you from?
I am from Tennessee. That's where I'm currently at now, and it
What?
is not nearly as cold as Virginia, but we're still pretty cold here. So,
Yeah, we go down there to Sevierville, Gatlinburg all the time.
mhm.
I saw a meme on Facebook the other day. It said Sevierville and Gatlinburg is Vegas for Baptist.
I s- I saw that too. I
So,
saw that too. I shared it with somebody else, and that's accurate.
yeah, yeah, we love going down there. Well, nice
Mhm.
to meet you, man. I'm excited to hear a little bit about your journey as well. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. For real.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I'd like to, just I guess introduce yourself, Daniel. Like, give us a little background, man, on like where you've been, like, and where God is kind of taking you now.
Yeah. Um. So I'll try to make it as succinct as possible because obviously, especially when dealing with addiction, there's a lot of other avenues
Yeah.
and stories that can be plugged in. But I'm from Tennessee. Um, lived here all my life, with the exception of when I was in Florida with Robert at Teen Challenge. Grew up in what would be considered a pretty typical family household. We went to church a lot. Um, I was in a private school, Christian school, a lot, um, and just picked up some bad habits being around some people that, not even that I didn't need to be around, just that I wished I was a part of that specific group. And so that's where
Mhm.
using started. But after that, I went through kind of the sober journey, getting in trouble with the law a handful of times, going in and out of treatment centers, hospitals, and everything that comes with addiction a lot of times. But now, actually, I just celebrated 6 years in January 10th, I believe. Yeah, January 10th.
Let's
And
go.
I'm working. currently in the field. I'm working at a treatment facility now, like a rehab. It's got a residential component to it, but we have our own transitional living houses. And so a lot of times we can offer the guys that. If there's no room there, we try to refer them out into the community to other places like that, IOP programs, that sort of stuff.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
So 6 years ago, what was the big switch for you, right? Because you said you were in and out of things, and like, what was that big aha moment for you, man? Right? Because you grew up in a normal home, right? It's
Right.
like parents go to church with you. You go to a good Christian school, and
Mm-hmm.
for many people, that's like the ideal life, right? A lot of people would
Right.
love to be in your shoes, and so like you went astray, but yet I love that scripture where it says, "Train a child in the way that it should go, and it will never
Mm-hmm.
depart from it."
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, man, I could only imagine if you can maybe even speak into it. Like, how do your parents, like, what was your parents' perspective on like your life and like what you were going through during that time?
Right. So I would kind of break up my story into like two halves, I guess. Started drinking pretty heavily towards the end of college. And a lot of stuff happened, and I got a DUI, my second one, at the end of college. And that's where I wound up in Florida. I'd been to a treatment center, and then I moved to a halfway house, and I got kicked out of the halfway house. And I wound up at Teen Challenge in Florida. Stayed there for about 6 months after graduation. And I moved back here to Tennessee to go to school here in Jackson, Tennessee, Union University, actually. Um, and I don't even really know. I tell people like that first time I got sober, it was less about addressing the problems that led to my use and more about just don't drink or just don't use.
Mm,
And that does work for a while. I mean, it kept me sober for a while, but that there's no foundation there. If your
mm,
foundation is to use, as soon as you use, it's gone. And that's kind of what happened is I chose one night to just now, there's a lot of mental stuff that kind of leads up to a relapse, but I chose one night to just go out and drink, and I didn't stop until I got in trouble again. I got another DUI. And all through it, my parents had been supportive. They really had been. But there was a time too where, like, as loving as they are and as loving as they had been, they lovingly stepped back. And at one point it was kind of like, you're on your own, man.
yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. And that last time I was in jail, and I remember thinking that switch, it wasn't even a big aha moment. Like, I didn't get struck down with lightning or anything. I wasn't like, oh,
Yeah.
but it's just this final shift is like, I can't keep living like this. Something's got to change. And I've
Mm,
blown as many opportunities as I've been given. So I'll just let whatever happens here while I'm in jail, and thankfully some stuff worked out and I got into another treatment center, another teen challenge here in Tennessee, actually. But yeah, that was kind of it. I just was like, I can't do it anymore. This is not,
yeah.
I'm at the end of my rope, and thankfully once I made that decision too, from a distance, they loved and cared for me and did the best they could. And also they'd kind of learned how to separate themselves while also supporting me, which I think ended up giving us a healthier relationship later. Now that I've had some
Mm.
time, it's us learning how to navigate that early stages of sobriety. So
Yeah. What was your view of God during that process, right? After kind of working through this, I mean, you grew up, right, Christian home and whatnot. And so when you went out and started to use, life started to unravel a little bit. How did you see God through that entire process, as you were struggling and walking through that battle?
when I was younger and going through it, I didn't really care, honestly, as much as I would love to say that I ran right to him. I didn't. And church was really just more of a thing to me. Like, it just was something that happened on Sunday and Wednesday. And um, I would say that I believe there was a God, but I didn't really care. It wasn't until I remember it pretty clearly too. I was in a hospital in Florida. I hurt myself pretty bad, and I sat down with a sheet of paper, and my parents were like, I've been kicked out of the halfway house. My parents were saying, you're not coming here. And I didn't have any of my friends' numbers, so it wasn't like I could call them. This was when I was in Florida, and I'm not from Florida. None of my friends live in Florida. I sat down and I wrote what I think I consider to be my first honest prayer. And I wrote, I don't really know what to say, God. I don't know what to do. I'm pretty scared, but I know that these decisions are mine, and I'm why I'm in this position. All I ask is that moving forward, like, I'm sorry for what happened. If I end up homeless, which at that time, if I'd have been discharged, I'd have just been on the street. That you just keep me safe, and I'm sorry. And I didn't really take hold of it. I know people listen like, oh, why didn't you just listen to him then? Well, I mean, I'm still not out of that mindset, but like, stuff started happening, and that's when my dad actually did call back, and he offered me the spot in Teen Challenge, and I went there, and my relationship grew. But again, it was less about like dealing with those things that led me to drink, and more about like, God is, I had a close relationship, but the sobriety and addiction and use was like a different issue to me. I never kind of merged them together. And so finally, I think I realized that what it had, like, when I broke down in jail, it was like God was there, and I could feel it that time, and it was really just that sense of like, I got to stop. This was for the better. As miserable as I am, this was better than the alternative, which was death at that point, really.
Right.
And then things again started happening once I surrendered. And I know that it doesn't always happen immediately like that, but for me, it was like, I was just like, God help me again. I know I've run out of chances probably, but like, just in case I haven't, can you do this for me again? And then like, stuff started happening. I got another treatment center, made some good friends there, that I'm still in contact with, kind of regrew that relationship with the Lord. And here we are.
It's like that battle Jacob went through, right? I mean, how many times did it take for him to kind of go through that conflict, with Laban and all the other stuff that he went through, stealing his brother's soup, stealing his brother's birthright for a thing of soup, and that God working that deceiver out of him. And it wasn't like overnight. It wasn't until the mountaintop. And even then it was a wrestling match, and like, I think a lot of times Rob and I have kind of unpacked this a little bit. There are people that have these like transformational clouds open up, light shines down from heaven, they get knocked off the horse, if you will, like Saul moments. But then there are others that we just walk through this proverbial wrestling match, like giving up our control. And I think that's okay too, right? And God has a way of drawing us back to him. And these transformations, it's not always going to be as easy as old creation, new creation, right? There's like a journey that takes place. And, between the before and after pictures that we see on the internet, there's a whole lot of pain in between those two places. And it's dealing with those places of pain. Rob, it looks like you had a question. So,
yeah, well, we have a really good brother in Christ, and we could all lift him up in prayer. His name is Ace, and he was recently on one of our casts last week, actually. But you were talking about like some of the mental things that kind of were ignored and kind of just pushed to the side. And that's what kind of caused a lot of your drinking and stuff like that. And so when you really didn't build that foundation and you never really had the opportunity to address those things, so this next come around, you're in a treatment center, like, what did that look like for you, kind of addressing some of those things, those rooted issues, and even sometimes even mental things, like issues, whatever it may have been? Like, how did you process that, man? Like, because like, we're so quick to be like, just pray about it. Like, there's this, counselor that I had in Teen Challenge. he was always just like, pray about it, just pray about it. Russell, you probably remember Russell, man, and God
I
bless his
remember
heart.
Russell well. Yeah.
Russell passed away, but there was a lot of truth to what he would say. But then at the same time, there were some things, man, it's like, man, I just need a friend to talk to and kind of flesh out some of these things that I don't really know how to process on my own. And so, like, how were you able to face that giant per se and say, you know what, now's the time that I'm going to face the very thing that I've been reluctant to actually address all these years?
Yeah, that's a good question. And even still, to this day, I'm having to readdress where I'm at and look at what's going on and address my focus. And you're right. I think a lot of times, and I used it as an excuse a lot of times too, to be angry, but a lot of times you hear when you go to somebody who's a believer or a Christian, who means well, and they're like, well, have you prayed about it? Like, yeah. Can you do it some more? Do you think you've done it
Yeah,
hard
yeah,
enough, kind of thing? And it's like,
yeah.
I don't I don't know how much harder or how much louder I have to yell for somebody to hear me. And for a while that was really frustrating and really confusing. It wasn't really until I was out of treatment the last time, and I've got a background like in psychology and stuff like that, but it wasn't really until the last time where I was like, you really do need, some people need it in different degrees, but you need that spiritual foundation of like, yes, I used, but it's because I'm fallen and it's because I do a lot of things, like it's not, that type of sin is a lot more visible, but it's not much
Mm,
different than anybody else's. It's this, a lot of the same stuff goes into it. Um, so it's taking that spiritual aspect, and for me, it was kind of merging it with real um, mental health therapy, um, some medication, plugging myself into places that I probably didn't want to. I even talked to my therapist about this. I didn't want to go to places like AA. I didn't want to go to places like Celebrate Recovery or anything like that in the beginning, because I guess in my mind it was, I could say I had a problem, but deep down here, I don't know that I was really ready to admit that it was a problem. And finally
mm,
breaking down and going to those places was like the admission, the final wall. It was like, yeah, this is a place for me. And it took a lot of prayer, honestly, talking with somebody and allowing myself to be poured back into as well. I think that was another big one, because it was easy for me to think I'd had all the Christian stuff I could handle. Like, now I just need this. Well, again, it takes really, I think, kind of a merger of all that together, and to different
right.
degrees for people. And so it was, seeking out that help and actively kind of learning about myself and what I needed, in addition to, um, a church family, in addition to, trying to keep that daily quiet time stuff going, in addition to reading books by, people with much more knowledge and life experience than me. And so that's kind of how, I ended up addressing it, and I don't know a lot of people that did it differently, but that's what ended up working for me, and that's what's been working. And so that's what I'm going to keep doing.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny that you brought that up though, man, because like drinking in theory, it's like it's socially acceptable, right? In our
Yeah.
culture today. So it's like
Mhm.
this isn't a problem. Like when you go out, you want to go to a party, you drink, you're at this event, you have a drink. It's like
Mhm.
everything you do, and people are like, man, I can't get loose or I can't be me unless I have a drink, or it's like this needs to be done. And so it's like, okay, if I'm like just gone,
Mhm.
that's not a problem. Like I just had a good time that night. And so
Yeah.
I like that you brought that up, man, because for me, right, obviously my choice of drugs were hard drugs. And so like, just like walk down the street smoking a crack pipe or shooting dope up your arm. Like that's not like
Mhm.
socially
Yeah.
acceptable. But
Yeah.
I say all that to say, man, like the battle that you had to face, because like even now it's like you're going out to certain places and you see it.
Yeah.
And so the temptation that's there constantly and that's pulling at you, like how are you managing that, right? Because like you mentioned earlier, right? Like I never knew it could be this fun going to a concert and being sober, right? So enjoying
Mhm.
good music, people that you love. Now you're sober. It's like, but they might have these, um, drink stands, or you guys like you go to
Mhm.
get gas, and it's like you go, you go to the the gas station. There's
Yeah.
all this beer
Yeah.
there. Like let's pregame. It's like yeah, we're
Mhm.
gonna pregame with Celsius now, rather than beer.
Mhm.
It's like how do you manage that, man? Like that's for me that'd be really hard.
Yeah, and it was really hard in the beginning. I had to kind of change everything, like living a new life for um like living as a part of the kingdom rather than as like actively against it forces you to change a lot of stuff. And
Woo!
and
You
That's
said a
good.
mouthful right there.
at first
That's
it
so good.
and I had a choice too, whether it was like, do I make these changes? And I can't say that I would have been like not a Christian anymore, but like the reality is like I wanted a fulfilling, I didn't want to just
Mm,
be sober like I was last time. I wanted a life.
Mm.
And so part of that was one, being involved in like the church, but also surrounding myself with people that I knew would keep me accountable. But also part of
that's
that
it.
too was being as honest as I possibly could about where I was at, which was also really, really difficult. Um, Another thing I would do and still do is kind of whenever I feel like, oh, maybe this isn't that bad, and I tend to overcomplicate things personally. It's like in my mind, it's yeah, right. I think a lot of people do, but in my mind, like not drinking for the rest of my life feels like a really big deal. And even in
Mm,
AA, they'll say it too. It's like 24 hours a day. And it's like, well, if I can stay sober till the end of the day, maybe I'll readdress it then. Breaking my
right.
time up into little bitty bits. Like well, I'm not gonna get gas or I'm not gonna get beer when I go into this gas station. Um, and then even kind of like congratulating yourself, because those are big steps, especially if you're used to doing that over and over and over again. And then I think one of the biggest things was um, just asking myself at the end of the day, as simply as possible, is maybe I can have a drink again, right? Maybe I can do all those things those people do, but is it worth risking what I have right now
Wow.
to simply have a beer? Is it worth risking going back to everything that I'd been through, like self-harm, trying to take my own life, hospitals, ruining family relationships, friendships? Is it worth going back to the bar over? And now it's easier to say no, but that wasn't always the case. But it's just continually reminding myself of where I came from, what happened, and what it's like now.
What was the mental work that it took to get through that to that place, right?
Hmm.
Where we're kind of moving out of the I mean, I guess delusion is the best word I can think of, right? That it's
Right.
okay for me to do this, to being able to have that clarity of mind to say
Yeah.
that this isn't worth it. Like, what did it take for you to get through that process? I mean, I imagine there was a lot of work that went into that.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot of time in prayer. Still, I found also that it was better and more for me. I guess when I heard prayer, it was like these really big, verbose, theologically dense prayers. And those are great. I think there's a time and a place for those. But really, what it boiled down to for me was being honest with God. Like, God, like I'm ticked off right now
Mm.
that I can't do this. Like why can't I, and just journaling it out, being honest and real as possibly could, and being honest
Mm,
with the friends around me, um, as I possibly could. Um, and through that, working through realizing that like mentally the Lord could provide me with everything I thought that I needed when I was drinking.
Mm.
And I think that I was compartmentalizing like a spiritual person, a mental person, an emotional, and so on and so forth. And so it was this realization that the Lord could provide me with comfort from there too. And it took a lot of wrestling, as you put it too. And something else I liked reading the story of like Moses when the Lord called him. He still was like, he saw the burning bush and it was like, okay, make that staff turn into a snake. Okay, now do this. And even still, he had to ask, but it was like every time I felt guilty about questioning God, it was like I would go back to that, and it was like, yes, Moses was God's chosen, but he still provided every time he had a question, and he still provided every time he doubted, and even still, even without, there was a little chastising too sometimes, but like he still provided what Moses needed in every single situation, even if it was to address doubts that he had about who God was. God was still willing to do that. And it was a lot of that was like, God, are you really who you say you are? Am I really going to be able to do this? Can I really do this? And the answers kept coming back. Yeah, you can. Me and you can do it. And everybody you put around you, So
Yeah, that's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, guys.
It's all right.
Throat's a little choked up. Yeah. I wanted to add something. What I love that you said, sorry. You said something, Daniel, that was really impactful. You said you didn't just get sober for yourself. You got sober so that you can be purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people tend to forget that they were created for an original design. We have an original design, an original blueprint to reproduce after our own kind, right? To multiply, to increase the kingdom. This is a kingdom that has lost many members. Yet if we are unwilling to deny ourselves of the things, the pleasures that we once partook in, to reach out after those that don't have the same opportunities that we have, right? But to give them hope too, right? Like it's like nothing was wasted. You have to go through what you went through so that the story that you were able to share with others, that you can relate to the people that you're working with even now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, look, man, I know you've probably been through this process 1,000 times. Me too. But guess what? Right? I can show you how to walk through this thing now. And that's the beauty, bro. Like, I love how the Lord purged you of every doubt, unbelief, and fear, and just the oppressing thoughts of wanting to even consider using, and you were able to write it down. Like, journaling is such an impactful thing that
Mm-hmm.
many people don't do, and it's like we think journaling is like a thing that only women should do. Like it's like, oh, like you journal, like, well, you're weird, dude. It's like, no, like releasing that very thing that's in you that doesn't belong. That's like a burden that's taken off
Mm-hmm.
of your shoulders, right? And so,
Right.
yeah, I don't know, dude. Like from knowing you to where you are now, like I'm amazed, man. I'm so proud of you.
Well,
really
thanks. I
am, dude.
appreciate that, man. But,
Yeah, it's like
So
6 years.
can I ask you a
Yeah,
question
it's
about
great.
your work currently? And
yes.
so you mentioned that you're working in some treatment facilities now, and this is always something that intrigues me, being in the TC discipleship space, right? And
Mm-hmm.
some of the differences, and not necessarily criticisms of one another, but just
Mm-hmm.
differences, right? From
Right.
coming out of a very strong discipleship model to now where you're at on the other side,
Yeah.
working. And is the treatment center you're working in now more clinical in nature? How would you describe where you're at now, and maybe some of those differences that us being from the TC network, right? All three of us,
Mm-hmm.
TC family. I love to I just love to hear about that and kind of hear about how other people are doing treatment.
Yeah. It's very clinical, and it's very 12-step based.
Okay.
So while I make it pretty clear that like I feel and believe that like there's multiple ways for you to get clean and sober, but the way that worked for me was this. And I'm fortunate enough to be in a place that kind of allows that, and so while the facility itself would be 12-step based clinical, we'll do a lot of clinical work. We refer out to mental health counseling. We have intensive outpatient programs, very different from, I guess, the teen, not all teen challenges, but the teen challenges I was involved in,
Woo.
so, yeah. And so, but again, at the end of the day, spirituality is still a very big aspect
Okay.
for both the
Right.
teen challenge and in a secular treatment facility. You know, there's still going to be that emphasis on spirituality. Always. That's almost the number one thing you kind of have to recognize is after, you know, like if you're using like the steps, like that's like the third one, you know, is admitting that like, you know, a power greater than yourself could restore you.
Yeah.
And for me, that is very, very much the case. Restored me to sanity in a very big way, and I'm forever grateful for that.
Yeah, we started working with on Recovery Alive with on the TC center that I'm working at currently, and kind of John Eklund, the guy who wrote that book, he's taken the 12 steps, and it's probably similar to Celebrate, where just everything is infused with Jesus. And I heard him break it down. He said, you know, the 12 steps really are just love God, love others, and then go serve. He's like, that's the simplest way to put it. He's like, it is just discipleship. Like, you know, it's 12 steps of discipleship. And I'd never heard somebody put it so simply. As long as I've been around the TC world and around, you know, I've heard about the 12 steps and all that, but having him put it that simply and us starting to kind of implement that inside of our TC program and getting the guys engaged has been really, really helpful, you know, for their process.
Right. And I think too, like, I think you mentioned something as well, like it provides just some structure too, whether you're using it in like a secular setting or not. Like, let's say you're using it in Teen Challenge, it just gives you kind of like a roadmap. Aside from like when Robert and I experienced a lot of in some of our Teen Challenge days, like the just pray about it. It was like you can pray about it, but then there's steps to take after. And there's things to explore that come with that. And I think the 12 steps can be very helpful to kind of integrate that Christ-focused mentality into. It can be very helpful integrating it all together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Right. Yeah, how long have you been working there now?
At this particular place, just about 6 months now. I started in July. Before that, I was working at a school. And before that, I was at just a strictly outpatient program. Like I was teaching intensive outpatient classes, and I was a case manager for like a recovery court.
Yeah.
So now that you're doing this, like what systems have you actually put in place, like for yourself, like accountability wise? Are you plugged into your church? Do you go to a small group outside of? Like, what does that look like for you now?
Yeah, I mean, a lot like that. You know, I'm recently switching churches, so that's actually been a really fun experience though too. But I'm looking to get more involved. I'm actively looking for a small group outside of church, but being involved with people in it, you know, and just asking them, you know, like where can I get involved? What can I do? Staying in touch with some of those people outside of church. Again, those people that I know will keep me accountable and kind of stuck with me through all that stuff. I'm very fortunate to have a lot of friends that kind of prayed me through it and are still my friends to this day.
Right.
And the journaling is a big one. I try to exercise a lot. You know, it's about finding a system that really works for you as well. And that's what, you know, being involved with my friends, physically fit, journaling, and the spiritual family aspect of it is what helps keep me sober after spending a day of trying to help others in their sobriety.
Yeah, that's good. Such a holistic view, man. What have you learned through this process? Like Rob was talking about, mentioning that, man, like there's this element of fun, right, in your life, and outside of like the whole, and just being in the recovery world, working in the recovery world, right? It's extremely draining, you know, like it can eat you up and wear you down. I mean, that's just the life of the work, man. So how have you learned, man? You talked about that unwinding, like how did you end up discovering the stuff that brings you joy?
Yeah.
You know, and finding those hobbies, very practically speaking, because I quick story, and I won't go into a long dissertation on this, but I remember when I got home from Teen Challenge, I married a girl who, well, we were getting married, and she grew up in, we weren't married yet, but man, she grew up in the church. She had never touched a drug in her life. And I'll never forget the first time I sat down with the family dinner with her and all of her family members, and they're all sharing all these stories. And like, these are all fun, wholesome, like good stories. And I'm like, well, can I tell you about the time the house I was in got raided? Like,
Exactly.
and it was just like a very real issue coming out
Yeah.
of the program. Like, my
Mhm.
entire life had been drug addiction, and I'm sitting down having these wholesome conversations. And like, I had to earn those memories and those conversations. Like, I had to put the work in to get there. And
Right.
so, like, how did you end up finding some of those things, man? Like, on your journey that was, positive and life-giving.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point that not a lot of people realize either, is that it's almost a form of institutionalization. Addiction is, you come out of it and it's like, that's all you know. And so a lot of times your stories early on revolve around that. And that was very alienating for me at first, like a similar story was I've gotten some tattoos done, and most of them I remember, but then somebody would ask me about one. And it's like, what? I don't know where I got that one. I woke up in jail one morning and I just had it. They were like, okay,
Putting the wallet away.
Side of the party, right?
Yeah.
But I think the first thing was I had to really embrace the concept of God's grace. That was the first thing for me, because that really at the core, and I'm surprised I hadn't mentioned it by now, because I'll tell anybody, this is really where it all started in Teen Challenge the second time, was recognizing and realizing what God's grace really truly was. That was total and immediate and complete release from guilt and shame and condemnation from before I made this decision to after it. I'd never been or felt completely free until that very moment. I didn't realize what grace was. I could tell you the definition, but I didn't believe it. Not deep down, and it wasn't really until I realized that, like, his grace is, and this came, a lot of this, and I can share it with y'all another time if you'd like, but I the Holy Spirit told me to write something down, and I wrote it, and I went back and read it. It was basically like, you're free. Stop it. And it wasn't really until I realized that, like, his grace was as much for the disciples as it was for the Roman soldiers, that, like, I can't explain to you what happened in that moment. And again, it wasn't just this huge sky opening, but it was almost as though you could feel the weight fall off of me,
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, now let's do this. This is where it starts. This is that freedom. This is where I can do things. And it was, relearning a lot of hobbies that I'd set aside. A big one was reading. A big one was running. A big one was music. I love music. I don't play any instruments, but I really like music. And so, again, aligning myself with people that were positive influences, is finding things to do with them. It really was just learning about how to do life and learning who I was in the kingdom, who I was without drugs and alcohol, who I was after grace. I mean, that's what it boils down to, and so I had to try a lot of stuff too. Some of it I didn't like, like I tried painting. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I was really bad at it, and it made me frustrated. So I didn't do it anymore. But even still, it was really constant prayer too. Like, I was scared that life was going to be boring, and it's not. I can do everything and anything I did, and then some, sober, that I was doing when I was drunk. I have money. I have more time. I have more friends. I remember stuff. It's like, looking back, it's like, why didn't I do any of this earlier?
Yeah.
And so
that's so good, dude. The hobby thing. Like, I feel like it's like a life thing for me. I feel like I have still yet to find a hobby. I'm like, what do I want to do? Like, you have 3 kids, so that takes up a lot of your time, and you're married and all these different things. But it's true, right? Like, what are you willing to, like, open yourself up to? Just try different things, and if you don't like it,
right.
So like, what was that for you? Yeah, it seems easy, but it probably was hard.
It was. And because I wasn't used to doing anything without drugs or alcohol, and I wish I could tell you I did 1, 2, and 3, but it wasn't like that. It was a lot of trial and error, kind of figuring out how to allot my time. Because sometimes I'd spend too much time doing some one thing and it would exhaust me, or then it would be like I wouldn't do one thing and I could feel those kind of negative thoughts and feelings getting up, and it was a lot of trial and error. And now it's like I just kind of do what I want as long as I know that it's going to be a safe environment and with the right people. It's not as nearly as restrictive as I thought it was going to be at the beginning.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that's really good.
Rob, got Justin.
No, man, I think, man, it's been really good. Like, yeah, I appreciate you sharing your story and kind of, just going through the details, man, of just kind of being honest about that mental health component that kind of layers in there, that a lot of times I think, in the church world, we kind of shy away from that. It makes us uncomfortable and nervous, and I did a mental health series at our church early this year, like I'm, if you come to the altar with a broken arm, I'm going to pray for your broken arm, but then I'm going to send you to the doctor and tell you to go get a cast put on it, you know? Yeah. And yet that's okay. But sometimes when we can't pray away the mental health issues, we think something's broken in our faith. Right. And it's really, that's not the case, like we need to pursue and receive help for that. And I really like the fact that the church is starting to discuss it more, and I just can't pray harder. It's like, no, sometimes you've got to go out and get some work done and get help, and it's so important. Yeah.
And that's really how I would describe it to people when they ask me too, because there's still, I wouldn't say pushback, but there's still a lot that the church, I feel like, doesn't understand about mental health. Not because it doesn't want to, but because it's never integrated that, I guess, it's never taken that into account in a lot of ways. But I say a lot similar to what you would say. So your brain is as much a part of your body as your arm or your leg or your knee. And that means that there's just as much potential, if not more so, in the brain because of how complex it is for things to go wrong. Yeah. And it still needs a doctor as much as you would like the flu, broken ankle, broken leg. So,
yeah. I didn't go to therapy. I went to therapy back in 2019. I went through Teen Challenge in 2005. And it actually wasn't until after working in Teen Challenge for 13 years that I kind of realized where some of my identity had been wrapped up in my work rather than really figuring out who I was. And I sat down with a therapist after leaving TC from 2019 to about 2020, right before the pandemic. So I got myself squared away before the world fell apart. Right.
Yeah.
And so good timing, but man, it was just so helpful. It was just one of those things like, why did I wait so long to do this? Now it's like, they're there, and it's like regular maintenance, when I need to chat with somebody and work through that stuff, man, it is there. But I appreciate you, Daniel, so much. Rob, did you have anything else?
No, I just wanted to encourage people that are probably listening. They've heard Ace's story. Now being able to hear Daniel's story, like reach out, from my perspective, right? Kind of just piggybacking on something that Daniel said, the church not really understanding. A lot of times people don't understand because they've never had the same experience. And so when you're not going through anything mentally, you think that everybody should think the same way that you think, and that's not always the case. And I think we have to be very careful not to always impart that upon other people. But yeah, like, dude, keep doing what you're doing, Daniel. Like, keep pouring into people. I'd love to get you back on here, man. Like, however long, just a recap where you're at, like what the Lord's doing in your life. And man. But thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And if I could just throw one more thing out there, Rob, because ADHD, and I have to say this now. No, but that part of like the church, like I would just encourage church folks, like, know when you need to refer. Your pastor is not your therapist, right? Like, and I have said that from the pulpit so many times. I'm here to give you spiritual counsel. But if you need therapy, I am not going to step in and be your therapist. I'm going to refer you to a therapist because it's a stewardship issue at that point over the people that we're called to
Mhm.
lead. And that's one of the biggest struggles, I think, at TC. Like, I think where I've had on the intake calls in the past, early on, I just wanted to reach everybody.
Mhm.
But the program that I operate, it's a small center. We do 6 months. It's discipleship driven. It ain't for everybody.
Right.
And that's okay. Right. There are
Mhm.
other
Right.
places out there for those people to get help that may not be a fit in our location. And so I would just encourage some of those that are maybe listening to this, ministry friends, you're in the recovery field, your referral list is your best friend. Know when to refer and know when you're able to help and you're out of your wheelhouse. And that's
Mhm.
okay, because this community all works together to ensure that people get the help they need. And that's really what it boils down to. It's about helping people. Doesn't
Right.
matter who does it. We just want to see people get well.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Good.
that was my closing rant. God bless you guys.
That was a good one. Good one.